In this lesson, we're going to talk about chromatic slash chords. But before we do that, I want to have you look at something. Obviously, you have diagrams for each lesson where I've plotted things out on the fingerboard. I also have an Appendix A and Appendix B. I want you to turn to Appendix A, and on that you will see that we have a chromatic grid work. And then if you look all the way down the left-hand side, you'll see all these different kinds of scales. And we're not getting into the scales so much in this part of this lesson, because now we're talking just about chords and voicings. But you do need to concern yourself with memorizing the top of where it says chromatic, so you know all of your enharmonics. That's very important. Now let's look at the fifth string, for example. If you were to take a chromatic scale from C to C, C would be 1, because we're always going to name things in reference to the major scale. If you come up a half step, you've gone one slot or column over to the right, and that's labeled a flat 2 or a flat 9. So that would be a C sharp or a D flat. You could also call it a sharp 1, but we call it a flat 2 or a flat 9 because those are the kind of numbers you would encounter with scales and chord voicings. Go up another half step. You're on a D, which would be a 2 or a 9. Go up another half step. You're on an E flat, which could also be called D sharp. So you could call it flat 3, or D sharp would be a sharp 9 or sharp 2. Up one more fret. E is the 3rd or the 10th. Up one more fret. F is the 4th or the 11th. Up one more fret. F sharp would be a sharp 4 or a sharp 11, or you could call it G flat, which is a flat 5. Up one more fret. G is the 5 or the 12. Up one more fret. G sharp would be a sharp 5, or you could call it A flat, which would be a flat 6 or a flat 13. Up one more fret. A would be the 6th or the 13th. Up one more fret. B flat would be a flat 7. One more fret. B is the 7th, and then we complete our chromatic scale on C again, which is 8 or 1. Now I need to have you memorize those numbers, those enharmonics, because we may use interchangeable numbers. One time I might call it a sharp 4, another time I might call it a flat 5. They're the same thing for all practical purposes, aren't they? Make sure you understand this concept of your chromatic scale. Ultimately, we're dealing with a 12-note group. We have 12 possible notes that we can play, and all of our chords and arpeggios and scales and things are subsets of that. Now, just a quick overview. If you go down the left-hand column, you'll see different modes: Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, etc., etc. And then I've simply put X's that show you what tones out of the chromatic scale constitute that scale. We'll talk a lot more about this later on when we're soloing over this stuff, but it really is an important concept to think chromatically. And that's what we're going to get to now. I want you to turn to diagrams 3A through 3F. What we're going to be dealing with here will be C chords with a chromatic scale underneath it. Hence the name chromatic slash chords, because what we're going to be doing is looking at what happens when we have different bass notes. And there's a little bit of thinking here, but most of this is going to be some ear stuff. You're going to say, yeah, that sounds strong, yeah, that sounds weird. We're going to hit some pretty tension-oriented chords. So let's look at diagram 3A. In red, we have our second inversion C chord that you learned back in lesson 1, right? That occupies the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd strings. So the way I'm looking at things, since I'm down at this end of the neck, I can't go any farther to the left. I've got open strings. That's as far as I can go. So we're going to start with the open strings and look at all the things we have available on the bottom 3 strings, the 6th, 5th, and 4th strings, and up through the 5th fret, because in terms of stretching, that's about as practical a stretch as you're going to want to deal with. Okay, so we're looking at the upper portion of diagram 3A. What happens if I play this C chord and I play the open E? Well, that's the 3rd of the chord. Well, that's just another 1st inversion chord. So it doesn't sound offensive because you're just playing a C chord. No big thing. What happens if I put the F or the 4 in the bass? We get a different sound. I'm not going to worry about naming it right now. I just want you to be aware of what's going on. What happens if I put the F sharp? We got some tension, right? And then the G. We're back to a C chord because the G is the 5. The G sharp. Got some tension, right? And then the A. Now that same A, which is a big stretch here, is available over on the 5th string open. That's just an A minor 7. Sounds in size, not a problem. How about the B flat? And by the way, you see me using a cross finger. I could just as well play different fingerings, and I encourage you to do that. Every possible fingering. All right? So we have the B flat under it. Well, that's a C7 with the B flat in the bass, a 3rd inversion C7. but it's also a B flat 6, 9, sharp 11. Don't be overwhelmed. You're going to learn all these concepts of what a slash chord really is. But you would call that a C over a B flat bass, right? C over B. Got some tension there. It needs to be a passing chord. We're back to a C. Now you know that the regular numbers are the major scale, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8 or 1. That's your major scale. Back on Appendix A, that was the Ionian mode. How many times have you heard this? I'm just walking the bass line down, right? So that'd be a C, C over B, C over A, C over G, C over F, C over E. Okay, a lot of times you might hear it walking up. Here, now on a keyboard, this is pretty easy because you're playing the chord with your right hand, and then you're playing the bass note just coming up the scale with your left hand. On the guitar, we got some challenges. Now you might say, well, I'll just let the bass player do this. And indeed, in a band, that would probably be how you'd play it. But I want you to understand how to compose with this technique, and also how to hear these different harmonies and understand what key or keys you're in, what scale or scales you're going to use. It's just about knowledge, right? Okay. And then we have on the 4th string, well, we didn't finish up. Here we have a C. Now you could play a C over a D flat. A lot of tension, right? C over D. And that same D is available right there. C over E flat or D sharp. C over E. C over F. C over F sharp. Some of these chords sound very tension-oriented when they're just a snapshot like this. But when you're within a certain scale in which these tones are all a subset of, they're very valuable in terms of voicing and for your single note work. All right, that was diagram 3A. Let's look at the lower portion of diagram 3A. We were just thinking left to right on the fingerboard. What we're doing on the lower portion of this diagram now is you play that same second inversion C triad up here in the 12th and 13th frets, and then you capture your bass notes farther down the neck. The beauty of the guitar is that once you learn a fingering that's movable, meaning it doesn't have any open strings in it, it's always going to be the same. So here I am, for example, I'm in C, right? What if I wanted to play that in the key of A? I've got a fingering, a lick. I hate to use that word, but it's something that I can rely on that'll be the same. It's no different than knowing that I have a bar chord progression. I need to do it in a different key. We all play that way, don't we? We take a pattern, we move it around. So learn these patterns, and I'm not saying you've got to know everything about this right away. This is an introduction to this concept of seeing the big picture. I'm going to say that again. This is an introduction to the concept of seeing the big picture, the chromatic world here. Okay, and within that you have all of your different tonalities. Look at diagram 3B. The only difference now is that our chord voicing has changed, because we still have the same scale degrees on the bottom strings, don't we? But instead of playing a second inversion C chord, I'm playing a first inversion C chord. That changes the sound. So I would have C over E, C over F, C over F sharp, C over G, and so on, right? And the reason I have these in numbers is that it doesn't matter what key you're in, the numbers are always going to stay the same in terms of the pattern. For example, here you have a C chord, right? Because you got the C in the bass. There you have a C over a B flat bass. Well, you need to know that it's a C chord, a major chord with the flat 7 in the bass, because it doesn't matter what key you're in. If I was in E, for example, here I have the E with the root in the bass, E with the flat 7 in the bass. It'll always be that way because you learned your chromatic scale on Appendix A, right? A whole step lower than 8 or 1 would be the flat 7. Make sure you know that chromatic scale is 12 inches or in a foot. Well, you got 12 half steps in an octave. It's real important to see the intervals. Okay? And in diagram 3B, we look at it in both areas of the neck, because when we're down here, we're limited in the key of C. Open is as low as we can go. If you're up here, you can actually run lower, can't you? It gets a little crowded, but the point is, it's all available up there. right, let's move over to diagram 3C. We're getting these chord voicings from back there on diagram 1 when you had all the different major chords for the key of C all over the neck. So now we're looking at this root position C chord. Really quick, test it, see if you practice all your different fingerings. Let's watch this. 2, 3, 1, 3, 2, 1. 3, 4, 1, 4, 3, 1. 3, 4, 2, 4, 3, 2. 2, 2, 1, 3, 3, 1, 4, 4, 1. 3, 3, 2, 4, 4, 2, and ultimately I could play it 4, 4, 3. So those are all those fingerings that I could play just with my left hand on that C chord, right? Make sure you know those. But for this, we're going to play this C chord with a 3, 4, 2 fingering. The reason is you need to have your first finger free to capture these bass notes that you see in diagram 3C. All right, so here we have that same C chord with the third in the bass. So the names would all be the same as when we did it down here with this C chord, right? Here we had C over E, C over F, C over F sharp, C over G. What's the difference? It's a different sound because your triad up on top has changed. You can hear that. And that's about the ear training here that I want you to get a handle on. Okay, now we're not going to belabor this. I think you see where we're going. And you would want to practice this through the full range. And this is also good for you because it opens up your vision on the fingerboard and it challenges you technically. Now I have to do some switching because I need to keep going unless I want to switch over to the 5th string. If I want C over B flat, C over B. Okay, now it's getting a little testy here, so I have to re-finger my C chord. Now that's pushing limit. I probably wouldn't play this C chord like that because that same C is available on the 5th string. But the C over B, see how I'm coming up with rather unorthodox crossed fingerings with double stops? It's because the notes are on the neck and I want to play them, so somehow you're going to come up with a fingering whenever it's possible. So don't think something's impossible. Work with it and you'll probably be able to get it. On the 5th string, C over A, C over B flat, C over B, C over C, C over C sharp, C over D, C over E flat, C over E, C over F. Now we look at the 4th string. C over D, C over E flat or D sharp, C over E, C over F. We've got different fingerings we could do there, right? And I know that fools you on the videos because it's hard for you to follow what I'm doing. Well, it won't be hard if you recognize the fingerings I'm using and you also understand where I'm getting my information. I have this C chord. I don't care how it's fingered. I see the notes on the neck and then I see a bass note. I'm just putting them together, right? C over F sharp, C over G, C over G sharp or A flat, C over A, C over B flat. And right there we have something that's rather challenging on the guitar, a little bit of a stretch, but that's the way a keyboard player could play a C7 with great ease because the notes that are close together on the keyboard are easy to play. For us as guitarists, that's a little more difficult. All right, let's move on. Diagram 3D. This gets a little easier. It's probably the easiest one here because you're dealing with this second inversion C chord, which could be played with any of the 4 bars, and then you could play it with other fingerings. But we're going to use a bar. We're going to start off with your little finger as the bar. And then if I want to keep going, I would, for example, so do you see you have this full range of the chromatic scale from open to the 10th fret that's usable with this chord form. This is probably one of the best chords on the guitar. It's easy and it sounds great. Second inversion triads really have a great sound, especially for slash chords. Let's move on. Diagram 3E. We're up here on the first inversion C triad coming out of your E form C chord. Okay, you got to see different fingerings on this. And on this, I actually would probably play a cross fingering. You know, or either way, the cross finger just seems to be a little easier because you roll over on the side of your second finger and you slightly collapse the DIP joint. C over A, C over B flat, C over B, C, C over C sharp or D flat, C over D, C over E flat, C over E, C over F. Okay, when we look at the 5th string, C over D, which is the 2. See, I'm not calling out numbers, I'm giving you letter names. C over E flat, C over E, C over F, C over F sharp, C over G, C over G sharp, C over A, C over B flat. Then we have the fourth string available to us. C over G, C over G sharp, C over A, C over B flat, C over B, C over C, which you just call a C, C over C sharp or D flat, C over D, C over E flat. Okay. Our final diagram takes the root position C chord, which exists right there out of that same form. We're going to finger it with the second, third, and fourth fingers. I don't need to give you the names. You, at this point, can probably name these quite well. Now, that gets a little radical trying to play the C over F right here. You can see I'm leaning way over. I'm doubled over the guitar. My chin's actually on the horn. Okay, over here, C over D. All right, a lot of information in this lesson. And I'm not telling you got to be able to play it all. I want you to be aware of it. Know where your options lie on the fingerboard, because you have these chromatic scales on your bottom strings and you have the chord forms on the top. Think of it like a piano. Your bass notes are what the pianist would play left hand. The chords are what you play with your right hand. We're going to put them together. And the next group, we're going to look at minor chords.